We had this conversation before the show. Who is the most influential white athlete of all time? In the chat, I need your answer.
I want to see what they say.
Any sport.
I need your answer. Any sport. Not football, not exclusively football, not exclusively basketball. Who is the most influential white athlete?
While we're waiting for
Caitlin Clark.
Oh, she like 3. So she like, yeah, she top 3.
Where are we putting
She
Caitlin
might be
Clark?
2. No, she's 1.
Oh.
She's 1.
Damn, that quick.
One.
Now,
Caitlin Clark, the most influential white athlete in all of history, Shady McCoy.
It only got to be white.
Someone recently described Caitlin Clark as the most influential white athlete in history while sitting in a room filled with people who were far from her supporters at the start of the discussion. Yet by the time the conversation wrapped up, not a single person could push back with convincing evidence. The debate originally began with names like Larry Bird and David Beckham being placed at the center of the argument. But as the discussion unfolded, everything eventually pointed in one direction. Step by step, the conversation kept circling back to the same conclusion. And that is how it ultimately landed there. One person summed it up perfectly by saying Serena was incredible for the sport. She was outstanding. Truly one of the greatest.
She was great.
The greatest.
Who was watching women's basketball? Think about what we're talking about, though.
Nobody.
Yo, you wasn't. You wasn't. He wasn't. I don't know why I was watching girls basketball. And then we get this girl like Steph Curry. Everybody watching. To this day.
To this day.
Women's basketball is looked at like the NBA.
Who do you believe holds the title of the most influential white athlete in history? And should Caitlin Clark be included in that debate, or even placed above everyone else? Go ahead and drop your opinion in the comments right now. Let's start with the question itself, because it is far more intriguing than it first appears. The topic was simple: the most influential white athlete ever, across any sport. From there, the discussion moved through several major names. People brought up Larry Bird, Michael Phelps, David Beckham, Conor McGregor, Tony Hawk, and eventually the conversation circled around Caitlin Clark. Not because anyone was trying to make a statement about race, but because when you evaluate the real criteria, impact, cultural reach, behavioral change, and the ability to move the entire industry forward, one name kept coming out on top every single time the argument reset.
You see, there's blocks where they're going to talk about Luka and they're going to talk about Caitlin Clark.
True.
Hey,
think about it. I like
Shady's
this point. Last point. The girl that should play at like I don't know, LSU or USC.
Yep.
She played at Iowa.
Yeah.
Y'all tripping. Caitlin Clark.
The problem is this though, 2-5. Serena Williams.
Let's start by looking at the candidates, because the process of narrowing them down is honestly the most fun part of the discussion. Michael Phelps was mentioned almost immediately, but the counterarguments showed up just as quickly and they made a lot of sense. Phelps is the most decorated Olympian ever, with 23 gold medals. He dominated swimming so completely that he reshaped expectations for what the human body could accomplish in the water. But the real question is different. Did his success actually make people want to jump in a pool themselves? Did kids all over the country start asking their parents to sign them up for swim programs? The honest answer is probably not on a massive scale. And the main reason comes down to infrastructure. Swimming requires access to a pool, which not everyone has available. Many families are not regularly visiting public pools either. Because of that, the barrier to entry for swimming is relatively high, meaning even the greatest swimmer in history could not easily turn his dominance into huge nationwide participation growth. Phelps was undeniably enormous as a sports figure, but his overall cultural reach still had clear limits.
Ireland, the most influential white athlete, though, point blank period, is David Beckham. They were not bended like Beckham. You know that, and you never watched a game of soccer in your entire life. Like that, like he's got stupid.
You don't think David Beckham?
Bro, David Beckham was like.
I don't think so. I'm not saying he's a great guy. He's a great dude and looks nice. He got magazines. I'm cool with all that.
Who wants to play like Larry Bird though?
David Beckham quickly became a serious contender in the debate, and the person presenting his case made some strong points. You could go your entire life without watching a single soccer match and still instantly recognize who David Beckham was. Bend it like Beckham became a cultural phrase. His hairstyles, his fashion sense, his high-profile relationship with Victoria, and his crossover appeal into entertainment media made him just as visible in magazines as he was on the field. Beckham truly became one of the most globally recognizable athletes of his generation, reaching audiences that had never even sat through a full 90-minute soccer game. That level of visibility represents genuine cultural impact. However, the counterpoint carried weight as well. When the focus shifts specifically to the United States, and American influence often dominates discussions like this because of the massive market, Beckham's impact leaned more towards celebrity than sport. He joined the LA Galaxy and brought enormous attention, yet soccer still did not explode into a major American sport during that period. His fame was undeniable, but his ability to fundamentally change the sport's position in the US remained limited compared to his global recognition. Larry Bird also surfaced repeatedly in the discussion, usually framed around his basketball legacy. Bird stands among the greatest players in NBA history with 3 championships, 3 MVP awards, and 12 All-Star selections. His rivalry with Magic Johnson is widely credited with helping revive the NBA during the 1980s. His influence on professional basketball is unquestionable. Yet someone in the conversation pointed out an interesting distinction. Kids weren't necessarily running around saying they wanted to be exactly like Larry Bird. He was admired, feared by opponents, and respected by fans, but the generation that copied his style or modeled their dreams after him was not as clearly defined as the generation that wanted to be like Mike. Bird shaped the game at the highest level, but he did not necessarily redefine who entered the sport in the first place. Then the conversation shifted to Connor. His confidence and swagger crossed racial and cultural boundaries in a way that very few white athletes have ever managed. The relentless trash talk, the bold personality, and the larger-than-life attitude pulled people in even if they had never watched a single MMA fight before. Plenty of viewers who had no real interest in mixed martial arts still tuned in to watch Conor McGregor press conferences simply because he was one of the most captivating speakers in sports. His Irish working-class roots, combined with the energy of someone who truly believed he was destined for greatness, resonated with audiences from very different backgrounds. That connection was unusual and undeniably powerful. But the argument against McGregor as the ultimate answer is also clear. His influence, while very real, existed within a specific time frame and mostly within one sporting lane. He helped make MMA bigger, but he did not reshape the entire sports landscape around him. Then the discussion moved to Tony Hawk, and interestingly, the group eventually agreed his impact is often underrated. Tony Hawk accomplished something many people overlook. He transformed skateboarding from a niche subculture that mainstream America largely ignored into something kids everywhere, from suburbs to major cities, desperately wanted to be part of. The Tony Hawk's Pro Skater video game series alone introduced skate culture to an entire generation that otherwise might never have encountered it. Even elements of mid-2000s style like Lil Wayne's skate-influenced aesthetic, skinny jeans, and the crossover between skating culture and hip-hop fashion can be traced back to the influence Hawk helped spark, even if most people do not always connect the dots that far to McGregor, and he received significant support in the room for a very specific reason. You know who Tony Hawk is even if you have never actually watched him ride a skateboard. That alone says a lot about influence. But then Caitlin Clark entered the discussion, and the person presenting her case did it in the simplest possible way. There were no charts, no detailed statistics, just a straightforward question. Who is watching women's basketball today compared to 5 years ago? The answer was obvious. Far more people than ever before. Maybe not literally everyone, but dramatically more than the audience the sport had previously attracted. The next question was even simpler. Why? The answer came down to a single name, a single player from Iowa who shoots from deep like Steph Curry and handles the ball with the confidence of someone who practically invented the step-back three. When she entered the WNBA, arenas started selling out immediately. Not only for the Indiana Fever's home games, but for road matchups as well. Visiting arenas began filling up simply because she was coming to town. The league suddenly had to deal with crowd sizes that many of those venues had never experienced before. The television numbers told the same story in another way. When Clark was playing, people tuned in. When she missed time with an injury last season, viewership reportedly dropped by roughly 50%. That decline was not limited to the Fever or to her specific games. It spread across the league's overall audience. One player creating a 50% swing in attention is almost unheard of. Even during the period when she was sidelined, the league still performed better than it historically had, largely because the wave of interest she generated did not vanish overnight. Her impact had already changed the baseline level of attention. Around the same time, the WNBA reached several major milestones: reports of its first profitable season, collective bargaining negotiations that delivered the largest salary increases in league history, and new television agreements that expanded coverage. Networks like ESPN began dedicating consistent broadcast windows to women's basketball, something the sport rarely received in the past. A new off-season competition, Unrivaled, was able to launch with legitimate audiences and real financial backing because there were suddenly enough dedicated women's basketball fans to support it. And the surprising detail is that Caitlin Clark appeared in only 13 games during the season when much of this momentum began building before her injury sidelined her. In less than 2 complete seasons, she helped create a foundation strong enough that the league's expansion continued even while she was off the court. Eventually, the discussion shifted to Serena Williams, and that comparison became the most fascinating moment of the entire debate because both perspectives contained truth. Serena Williams essentially became the sport itself. That is not exaggeration. For a long stretch, she represented women's tennis in a way no athlete before or since has replicated. Her level of dominance lasted so long and was so overwhelming that many opponents gained recognition simply for competing against her. Naomi Osaka famously became emotional after defeating her, illustrating how heavy the moment felt. Facing Serena carried such psychological intensity that even a victory could feel uncomfortable if the situation unfolded awkwardly. Coco Gauff has openly spoken about how Serena influenced her dreams while growing up, shaping the direction of her career. The ripple effects of Serena Williams within women's tennis remain extraordinary, with many players still competing today who are inspired directly by her example. Yet the detail that complicated the argument was this: the sport she transformed was tennis itself, a game that the average American tends to follow closely only during the Grand Slam tournaments and pays far less attention to during the rest of the year. A new off-season competition, Unrivaled, was able to launch with legitimate audiences and real financial backing because there were suddenly enough dedicated women's basketball fans to support it. And the surprising detail is that Caitlin Clark appeared in only 13 games during the season when much of this momentum began building before her injury sidelined her. In less than 2 complete seasons, she helped create a foundation strong enough that the league's expansion continued even while she was off the court. Eventually, the discussion shifted to Serena Williams, and that comparison became the most fascinating moment of the entire debate because both perspectives contained truth. Serena Williams essentially became the sport itself. That is not exaggeration. For a long stretch, she represented women's tennis in a way no athlete before or since has replicated. Her level of dominance lasted so long and was so overwhelming that many opponents gained recognition simply for competing against her. Naomi Osaka famously became emotional after defeating her, illustrating how heavy the moment felt. Facing Serena carried such psychological intensity that even a victory could feel uncomfortable if the situation unfolded awkwardly. Coco Gauff has openly spoken about how Serena influenced her dreams while growing up, shaping the direction of her career. The ripple effects of Serena Williams within women's tennis remain extraordinary, with many players still competing today who are inspired directly by her example. Yet the detail that complicated the argument was this: the sport she transformed was tennis itself, a game that the average American tends to follow closely only during the Grand Slam tournaments and pays far less attention to during the rest of the year. Even at the absolute peak of Serena Williams' career, if you stopped a random person on the street and asked them to name 3 other women's tennis players besides Serena, the silence would probably have been pretty noticeable. The case for Caitlin Clark is not that she is a better athlete than Serena. The real argument is about context and impact. What Clark accomplished happened inside a sport that was already deeply rooted in American culture, already broadcast regularly on television, and already something people had a basic framework for understanding. What she changed was the level of interest in the women's side of that sport in a way that had never happened before. Today, casual fans can name far more women's basketball players than they could 5 years ago. That is not only because the talent level improved, although it certainly has, but because one player arrived who made audiences curious about everyone sharing the court with her and everyone competing against her. Names like Kelsey Mitchell, Aaliyah Boston, Angel Reese, and Breanna Stewart are now familiar to many casual sports viewers who likely had never heard them before Clark entered the spotlight. The idea of a rising tide lifting every boat really applies here, and the tide that pushed everything upward was largely created by one individual. The dynamic involving Angel Reese also deserves direct attention because it came up during the conversation, and it is always a nuanced topic. When Reese and Clark faced off heading into the 2023 NCAA championship, that matchup became the moment that truly shattered the ceiling for women's college basketball viewership. That game became the most watched women's college basketball title game ever at the time. The rivalry was authentic, the personalities were compelling, and together they created an audience that neither player might have produced alone. That part is absolutely true. But the distinction people in the discussion pointed out is also reasonable. Clark had already been developing into a superstar before that championship meeting. She had already been making jaw-dropping plays on the court, deep step-back shots from near half-court, full-court passes that seemed impossible, and ball-handling skills that made people stop scrolling through their phones just to watch what she would do next. Moments like that made people who had never paid attention to women's basketball suddenly ask, "Who is that player?" The game against South Carolina, which happened before the rivalry with Angel Reese truly exploded, had already become a cultural moment. Fans watched powerful, athletic defenders try to slow down someone who seemed completely unfazed by their size, while launching three-pointers from distances that looked almost unreasonable. The topic of race in the conversation was addressed directly, but without turning it into drama. One point raised was that Clark being white in a sport largely dominated by black athletes added a certain cultural dimension that naturally attracted attention from audiences who might not otherwise have engaged. History offers a similar example. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird needed each other. The NBA's resurgence in the 1980s was not driven only by individual greatness. It was fueled by a rivalry that gave fans a story and encouraged them to pick sides. Clark's presence in the WNBA has created a comparable dynamic, whether people feel comfortable acknowledging it or not. At the same time, many in the discussion emphasized that true athletic excellence eventually rises above those labels. When the game is played at the highest level, what ultimately matters is the performance itself. And Clark's style of play, her ball handling, deep shooting range, court vision, and refusal to be physically intimidated, stands on its own merit. Strip away every outside factor, and the basketball alone is still compelling to watch. The conclusion of the conversation was not delivered as a bold declaration, but more like a shared realization that nobody in the room challenged. Caitlin Clark helped push the WNBA toward a new collective bargaining agreement, contributed to major television deals, and played a role in the league reaching profitability for the first time in its history. She introduced millions of viewers to players whose names they had never known before. And she has done all of this while still early in a professional career that has not yet produced the championships or individual awards that usually define a legend's resume. Tony Hawk remains a strong candidate for the most influential white athlete discussion. Conor McGregor made a powerful cultural impact. David Beckham carried global celebrity status, and Larry Bird helped reshape the NBA. But if the real question is who changed the surrounding ecosystem the most, who helped move a league toward profitability, pushed a sport into mainstream attention, and created an entirely new wave of fans, the conversation gradually settled in one place. It did not end with Bird, Beckham, or Hawk. It began with Larry Bird and ultimately arrived at Caitlin Clark. By the time the discussion reached that point, no one in the room had a convincing counterargument left. Whether you believe she has already earned that title or still needs time to fully prove it, the debate is happening regardless of whether the WNBA is prepared for it. Hit like, drop your opinion below, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next.